Welcome back to the Mature Male Podcast. I'm your host, Wes, a psychotherapist helping men mature through timeless wisdom and practical guidance. Today's guest is Larry Hagner, founder of The Dad Edge and host of the Dad Edge podcast. Larry has been empowering fathers since 2015, conducting over 700 expert interviews. I got to take some tips on parenting, mindset, communication, and building legendary lives as husbands and fathers. With a background in health, wellness, and nutrition, he's the author of The Dad's Edge, 9 Simple Ways to Have Unlimited Patience, Improve Relationships, and Positive Lasting Memories. Through his work at thedadedge.com, Larry helps men create legendary marriages, epic connections with their kids, and become the leaders their families need. Larry, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Wes, thanks for having me, man. So good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat today. So something I've been thinking about lately is how we live in this very dichotomous culture where you have a lot of high performing men and then a lot of underperforming men. But when it comes to the high performing men, there seems to be this assumed pressure that they need to figure it out on their own, that asking for help is a weakness. But I'm curious about your perspective on this because it seems like going about it alone mentally might actually be one of the things that's hurting us most. So what have you observed about the cost of isolation for men?
Well, as my very first mentor in the very first mastermind that I ever joined back in 2015, he said something that I think really rang true. Isolation is the enemy of excellence. And I'll tell you, that is insanely true. When we go about it alone, let's actually just talk about what I think men really relate to. And that's the lone wolf, right? And I even remember, I don't know how old you are, Wes, but I just turned 50. And I remember I was a huge Chuck Norris fan, like back in the day. Like I just loved Chuck Norris movies. And there was one movie in particular that I saw when I was in 5th grade. And it was my favorite Chuck Norris movie of all time. It was Lone Wolf McQuade. And it was all about, he was a Texas Ranger and he was like, obviously he was Chuck Norris. He was a badass. He beat everybody up. He arrested everybody. He was like highly decorated, but he worked alone. And that the whole movie, it was fascinating. It actually showed how it bit him in the rear end of working alone. And then he finally got it that he worked as a team at the end. And of course, he still beat everybody up, right? But like he finally got it together of like, wow, I can actually have a relationship with other men, right? Who are officers, right? Who came together as a team and they took down this huge cartel. And then he finally opened his heart to a woman for the first time since his wife had left him and stuff like that. But like literally, he lived alone. He had a pet wolf. But I think a lot of men are like, yeah, I'm the lone wolf. But here's the funny thing. If you really understand the lone wolf, right, of what actually happens in the world, in nature, the lone wolf is strong because of the pack. And the pack is strong because of the wolf. The lone wolf, it's not a good ending for the lone wolf. So usually the wolf will leave the pack when he knows he's too old and he knows he's going to die. He just knows he can't keep up anymore. And he's like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go die. And that's literally what he does. He leaves and goes and dies. Or he's injured and he can no longer keep up. So he leaves and he dies. Or he loses his pack and then he gets taken down by other predators and he dies. So it's not a good outcome for the lone wolf. And I want men to really hear that. The lone wolf is not strong by himself. He's actually very weak and very vulnerable. And his end is to die. And I think that's what happens to us, maybe not physically, right? In the physical realm so much. Obviously, we're all going to get there. That's the one thing we have in common. Mentally, emotionally, fulfillment, and how we operate, how we learn the best as well, how we operate at a high level. It literally comes from the people that we surround ourselves with. And I'll give you an example. I think we all have, my son right now, I have 4 boys. I have a 19, 17, 11, and 9-year-old. And my 11-year-old is going through that wonderful time. You know, I love that one movie, Middle School, Worst Years of My Life. It's one of the funniest kid movies, but it's hilarious. And anytime my kids want to watch it, I'm like, yeah, let's watch it. It's hilarious. But it's so true because those are the years, especially like when you enter into 5th and 6th grade, it's like you suddenly are like, wow. And I just had this conversation with my son. It's like, you suddenly realize not everyone is your best friend like you used to think. Like suddenly there's like, wait a second. Now there's different levels of friends and there's dynamics of friends. There's actually toxic friends. There's really good friends. There's friends that will, oh my gosh, this one's talking behind my back. This friend, I actually thought we were friends. We have nothing in common. Like I want to go out and ride bikes and all he wants to do is play PlayStation for 8 hours. That's not a relationship that I feel I have any common ground with. And suddenly like my 11-year-old the other night was in tears because he's just like, I don't understand what's happening. And me, my wife, my 17-year-old, my 19-year-old, we literally sat outside on the deck and we all talked to him and we all shared stories about how we went through the exact same thing. And we started talking to him about the different levels, the different degrees of friends. So like me and you, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm guessing you're probably a lot like me. I have my college buddies. Like I don't drink anymore, but I have my college buddies that like they're fun. Like we go out. Well, we used to. I don't do it anymore. But we go out, we drink, we party. You know, it's like we watch the game. We have the same stupid level, surface level conversations about how's the old lady. They still ask questions like that. How are the kids? I bet they're driving you nuts. How's work? You working your ass off? Does it suck? You know, and it's just like, no, none of that is actually true in my life. But then I've got my other friends, like you and I know a mutual friend, Jason McKenzie. Jason McKenzie and I have not only been business partners, but very best friends. And we have this iron sharpens iron relationship. Jason constantly challenges me to elevate, constantly holds me to a standard that I don't even hold myself at times. And he'll call me forward. He doesn't call me out because there's a difference. He calls me forward. And we have friends like that in our lives. When men have friends like that in our lives, where it's like, hey, you know what? We all have different strengths, right? Jason knows leadership and how to raise daughters, and he knows conversational excellence like nobody's business. He knows how to create an environment of what we call in our group psychological safety, where every person who's in front of him will gush and tell everything about them. They walk away from conversations with Jason and be like, I can't believe I just shared that with a total stranger. It's because Jason is so good at conversational excellence and creating environments of psychological safety that he teaches me that stuff, right? So if I want to be a better leader, right? And if I want to go have a difficult conversation with my son, I don't usually leave that type of conversation to my own vices because quite frankly, I'm going to screw it up if I do it alone. But I'll go to Jason and be like, hey, Jason, I need to talk to my oldest son, Ethan, about such and such, right? And I'm not exactly sure how to approach it. And I want to make sure he's engaged in the conversation. I'm pretty emotionally vested in this conversation. So I might be kind of triggering or I might come off like a bull in a china shop. What do you think I should do? And then that's where he has no emotional ties to it whatsoever. He has a very objective opinion. And that guy can really help me. Like, I can't even tell you how many times Jason or men in my circle who are just like Jason have saved me from my own dumbass moves. And I think that is the biggest difference because we all have these strengths, right? One of my strengths, and I'll close here with this, is marriage. Like, parenting can be tough for me, even though I run the Dad Edge podcast, which quite frankly is why I run the Dad Edge podcast. Cause I get to constantly learn that skill because I just don't know it that well. But I do know marriage. I do know how to connect with my wife. I do know intimacy. That's one of the things I get to teach men in our community with my one-on-one clients and with even my friends. My friends will come to me and be like, I don't know what's going on. I'd be like, well, tell me about it. And we'll walk through it. But all of us have strengths and all of us have opportunities. And if men just opened up to the fact of like, hey, that guy's really good at marriage. My marriage is not so great. I need to go hang out with that guy and really learn from that guy. Or maybe it's like, well, I'm really good at leadership. So I can teach other people about leadership. So, but maybe my strong suit isn't raising sons. So maybe I go into a circle where I'm helping men with leadership and they help me with raising sons. So it's a complementary thing. And yeah, I definitely agree that men should not go at it alone.
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving that initial analogy or imagery with the lone wolf. And I'm really glad you said what you just did and gave that real life example. And it's something that I've been reframing my understanding of competition. I think the standard definition for a man is I either have to be competitive or have connection, but I can't have both because if I allow myself to be vulnerable and need others, that compromises my ability to move up. But I think what you're getting at is if you prioritize the connection, then what happens is a natural competition with yourself that doesn't say like you need to keep raising the bar and never getting there, but actually, like you said, calling up and calling forward who you are in a way that you can have the humility to know no one can do it alone because that would require absolute strength in every area. So I think it starts with this humility of saying, what are my limits? What are my strengths? And then who can I look to? I think this is also really important when we think about male role models. Like you were saying the Chuck Norris example, you picked up that narrative underlying that it came to bite him in the ass. But if someone's just looking on, what they see is someone who got rewarded for doing it alone. And I think the biggest myth a lot of guys believe is it's going to have some negative repercussion if I slow down, if I open up, if I connect with another guy. And what we find, to your point in story with Jason, is that you actually expedite your potentiality because you're naming your weakness, which is the only way we can change. You're playing to your strengths, which gives you dignity and confidence to take risk. And you're finding social connection with which offsets the risk of burnout and of fear of doing it alone because it doesn't fall on you.
I think that's so well said. I really, really do. I think the connection piece is really, really key, and I think that's hard sometimes for men to connect because I even, I don't know what it is about the word vulnerability. I can't stand it. Like it just doesn't sit well with me. But I also know the unbelievable power that happens through vulnerability. I think men probably view vulnerability kind of like how somewhat maybe I do or used to. So when I hear the word vulnerability, it sort of hits me like a word like diet or budget. Like it's like I'd rather use I eat for my health than on a diet. I'm good with money management. I don't live with a budget, right? And when it comes to vulnerability, I really like authenticity and realism, right? So I think when men think of vulnerability, what a lot of us think of is like this sort of weeping negative Nelly, like the world is like this victim, like, oh my gosh, the world is against me, scarcity mindset, I'm crying on your shoulder. Right. And there's a part of me that sometimes when I think of that word, I think of that. Right. It just sort of comes to my mind. And it's kind of like diet. I think of restriction. When I think of budget, I'm thinking like, man, I can't spend any money. But when I label it differently, or if I think of the power that's within that, I think you can be insanely masculine and still be vulnerable. And I think men just need to probably understand what that looks like. And what I've seen it look like, if a man is like, my gosh, I don't know what to do. And I don't get me wrong. Like, listen, I think that there is absolutely a time and a place where men need to cry. I mean, I cry. I mean, I do. I cry. And I no longer even call that a breakdown because I think even that label is dangerous. I call it an emotional experience. We're all human beings, right? But I also think that when you're vulnerable with a man, so like for instance, when a guy comes up to me and is like, hey man, like I see that you and Jessica have a really great marriage and I don't know what is going on with me and so, like, but we're not connecting. We're not communicating. Like I can't remember last time we went on a date. And like whenever I advance to have sex with her, she rejects me and it kills me. And like, I don't know what to do. I am uncertain here. I am on uncharted waters. And I think when you approach a man like that, and when you approach that, that feels better to a guy, versus like crying a river and like it's something that they I think label as super emotional and even weak. But I'll tell you, like when you do things like that, when you say things like that, when you become vulnerable like that, there's a tremendous amount of strength and courage that that man has to display to do that. And here's the other good news too. I think a lot of us guys label other men or other people in our world as like, they don't want to hear this. I don't want to sound weak. I don't want to burden them. Usually, quite frankly, it's the opposite. When a man comes and asks another man for advice, it's like, how do we feel? It's like, wow, I feel privileged. Like you came and asked me this. Like, holy cow, I feel honored, right? And the other thing too is that when we do that, when we give that advice, we're also giving that man permission that we're asking to then ask us. And how many times have we been in a conversation where we are the first ones to open up to another guy? That man feels like, wow, like he probably feels privileged and honored you even come to him. And then he says something like, hey, while we're at it, can I ask you a few things? And then suddenly it becomes this really complimentary conversation that I think most men want to be a part of.
Yeah. No, I do agree. I mean, I'm a therapist and I would still agree with that language. And I think the reason why I work with a lot of men is because I don't approach it with a stereotypical definition of vulnerability. I agree. I think I call it going in the side door. You just got to use language that makes
I like
sense for
that.
men. I think also unintentionally, we have asked men to express their manhood through a feminized version of vulnerability. If you think about those things, those characteristics you said, it's not that all women cry or get real or break down, but it's that a man operates a little different. And it's either starting with what's the problem that you feel like you're trying to solve. Newsflash, you're not trying to solve it. You just need to be understood in it, usually. Because very rarely when someone opens up, are they actually looking for you to give them the the silver bullet answer. When that guy came to you about the marriage, it's not that he's looking for you in 3 sentences to solve all his problems. Actually, so much of the beginning of opening up, or what I would just call, honesty, is just the cathartic release of not holding on to it alone, of getting it out in the world. Because when it's in your head, it's eternally imagined, right? There's no endpoint. The problems they never end. The situation, these things perpetually build and build. When you say it, it puts limits on it, because now you're working within reality. Now someone else knows who can give you feedback on what's going on. And I know you mentioned you don't drink anymore. I'm curious if you've participated in any recovery programs, but there's this phrase I love from AA that says admitting gets you admitted. And I think you have to start as a man with simply admitting to yourself that you need help. And I think many men are scared, they're nervous, they don't want to have that first conversation with themselves that says, "Man, I'm not in a good place. I really need help." And you cannot reach out to someone else unless you've come to terms and had that conversation with yourself. But once you do, that's like the first domino. And hopefully then the question is, then who is the safest person or most trustworthy person in my life that's not my partner, not a woman, that I could basically have the same conversation I just have with myself, but with them? And then, like you said, it's so surprising, because that is not the end of the conversation. It's usually just the beginning, which is another fallacy I think many people have, that men don't want to open up. They don't want to share. If a man feels safe and secure in who he is, you might have to cancel your 3 meetings, because they're just going to keep going, and not in this blabby way, but in this sincere depth that many men carry, that's meant to be understood by others, that they've just held on to for so long.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And no, I've never been a part of a recovery program. I actually just yesterday I celebrated 1 year, and
Congrats.
it was kind of a fluke. I went on a cruise last year as a family, and I drank every day. And I usually I don't drink every day, but I wasn't drinking heavily. I was drinking like, I don't know, like throughout the day, like 3 to 5 drinks. And dude, I don't know what it was. It was probably the rocking of the boat. I never got sick or anything like that, but the rocking of the boat, it was like the smell of the drinks, the smell of the boat. It's like, I don't know if you've ever like experienced like something where you're just like, man, like I can't stand that taste or smell anymore. Kind of like it reminds me of that. Right. And when I got off that boat, I told my wife, I was like, there's not one part of me that wants to have a drink for like the next 30 days. Like all I can think about is being on that ship, which I hate. I don't like being on a cruise to begin with. It's not my cup of tea for a vacation. I feel like you're trapped on this boat in the middle of the ocean. It's just like, I'd rather be in the mountains or on the beach or something. And then that 30 days, I was just like, my wife, it turned into 2 months, 3 months. And my wife is like, you ever think you're going to go back? I was like, yeah, I'll probably go back to it I guess when I want it or crave it. And it's craving has never come back. And it just sort of like, I'm just like, man, I guess maybe I'm done. Like, and I feel great. So without it, but like, yeah, that was my stop drinking story.
Oh, well, I mean, to tie it to the conversation too, I have found there's a lot of guys that only get real when they're drinking, and they use that as this coping mechanism to, express who they are, and it's so normalized. But yes, I have some memories and some smells that come to mind. And yeah, the cruise ship is just like hell on earth, because it's like subpar unlimited food, and you're just
Oh my God.
trapped by like, these like random games and just kitschy things. And then when you actually visit somewhere, you get like 10 minutes to go buy a puka shell necklace, and then you're back on the ship for a day. It's just terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree, man. For some people, dude, they just love it. And for me, I'm just like, I don't, if I never do a cruise again, I'm good.
I'm
So
okay. Exactly. Um, well, cool. Well, I'm also curious. I'm fascinated by this idea that men can be crushing it at work. They can be doing great. They can be checking all the boxes off professionally. How many guys do you know that just brag or are able to speak to a really deep capacity at work, yet they feel completely disconnected at home? It's almost like they don't even know how to be a partner, a husband, a father. They just like break down in the sense of like freezing up. And it's like we've been sold this bill of goods that success in one area translates everywhere else. And I feel a lot of guys get frustrated with this, because they try to make these correlations. They're like, well, I'm so good at my job. My boss tells me to do this, then I do it. I get home and my wife tells me to do something and like I act like she's speaking a different language, or like I don't know how to respond to my kids, etc. So I'm curious, what does it actually look like for a man to become intentional about creating that legendary legacy at home? And why do you think many of us struggle with that transition from the break room to the living room?
Such a good question. So I'm going to answer this two different ways. I'm going to answer this because I've done both, and we serve both. And that is, let's talk about the career guys out there, right? And let's also talk about the business owners out there, because I think there's a different mindset with business owners than career guys. And I'm not saying better or worse. I'm not saying that at all. It's just different, right? It's like an apple and an orange. That's really it. They're both fruit. They're both delicious and all that good stuff. It's just they're just different. So I was in the career space for 18 years. I was in medical device sales for 18 years. And actually I was in medical device sales for 18 years, but I was really in the corporate world for 21. And I worked my way all the way up from the trenches as a pharmaceutical rep, and then I got into medical device, and then I was in the trenches there, with my own sales territory, got into, mid-level management as a regional manager. And then by the time I left the industry, I was the national director of sales and was in line to be the next vice president of sales. And here's the interesting thing. The higher I moved up and the more that I was paid, the more miserable I got, which blew my mind. I could not figure that one out for the life of me. I'm like, I mean, like, I'm no kidding around. I was making $300,000 a year when I left the industry in 2021. And I was literally the most miserable I have ever been in my life. And I was scratching my head and I'm like, I don't understand this. Like I have means to provide for my family. My wife doesn't have to work. You actually need about that much money to feed four boys with the amount of food that they eat. I'm joking, but I'm not. It's just like, oh my God, the grocery bill's it's insane. But what I found is I was doing work that I did not enjoy, especially as it came to mid-level management or high-level management. And I was drained out of my mind. I was traveling a ton. I was burnt out. I was overwhelmed. I didn't really realize that at the time because I justified it with like, well, I get these perks. I get like a car allowance. I get an expense account. I get to travel. I will tell you, I hated being on an airplane. Felt like a cruise ship. It felt like prison to me. Like I literally felt like it was like the worst place I wanted to be was in another airport, because I was in an airport every single week. And I'll never forget one time when I called my wife and I was in the Orlando airport and I told her I had been I had been gone for 3 weeks. And upon leaving that meeting, I found out that in another 3 weeks, I was going to be gone another 3 weeks. And that was actually going to be my schedule for the next year. Home for 3 weeks, gone for 3 weeks. And I called my wife and I was like, I just want to quit. I'm ready to actually call my boss right now and quit. And she's like, then do it. I'm like, I can't. Like, what are we going to do? Like, this is in 2015. This is like right before I started the podcast. So I think there's a level of, I can't remember the statistics. I think it's 82% of men that go to a job every single day actually despise it to some degree, right? Only 18% of men who go to work actually love what they do. And I was definitely in that 82%. And I think it's hard for men to transition from being in a job that they absolutely despise for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and they're working their finger to the bone, and then they feel guilty that they're not at home. Then they have to transition into being into being dad. And let's face it, most men don't know how to do this well, right? We don't know how to do marriage well. We don't know how to do fatherhood well. And that's the reality. But here's the thing that I think really help men like let themselves off the hook. Like, you're a psychotherapist, right?
Yeah.
How many years of school did you have to do? How many years of school did you have to do that, to be trained to do what you do?
Yeah, so there's 3, and then you have minimum 2 years, which is essentially similar to a doctor in residency, where you have to earn enough hours to get the full licensure, and then every year you have to do a certain number of training, like credits, essentially, to keep the licensure.
Right. Exactly right. So I got a 4-year degree in sports med and a minor in nutrition. So can tell you anything about the body, right? You're all about the mind, right? And everything and everything in between. When I did martial arts for about 13 years, and yeah, I had an instructor. We had a curriculum. I went to class. We practiced, we sparred, we competed. When I got my job in surgical sales, like, we had a 90-day training. Like, before you even set foot in an operating room and stand shoulder to shoulder with a surgeon, You were trained for 90 days, day after day after day. You had to take written tests, practical tests, everything before they cut you loose in the OR because they don't want you to be a loose cannon, right? And when you get married and when you become a dad, they're like, you got it. Best day of your whole life. Don't worry, you'll figure it out. And that's that's crazy. That's nuts. Like we don't do, you've got to take a test to drive a car, right? You got to go buy, you got to go take a class to go hunting, but you just walk down the aisle in Vegas and get married and it's just going to work out. Like, I don't like that's when I think about it now. And after doing this work for so long, I'm like, oh my gosh. And there's the gap. People assume that it's going to work out because we love each other. People assume like it should be, rainbows, sunshine, and unicorns, and we should be good at it. And when I tell this to men, like, and I always put it in their world, like I just took on a one-on-one client right now who's been doing jujitsu for 14 years, and he's having a lot of trouble in his marriage. And I'm like, you obviously love jujitsu. And he's like, yeah, I do. And I was like, did you ever compete in a tournament before you started taking classes? And he's like, no, actually, I did class for a year before we did a tournament. I was like, well, why? He's like, well, I want to be prepared. I was like, well, how much time and effort and preparation did you do for your marriage? And you saw it click. And he's like, I've never done anything. I was like, well, can you imagine going to that first jujitsu tournament with no training? You're like, I've seen it on TV. Maybe I'll do pretty good. And he's like, no. And I'm like, then why do we think marriage and raising kids be any different? And he's like, oh my God, man. He told me, he's like, I feel like I just took the red pill. Like, he's like, I never thought of it that way. And society will tell us, right, that we don't need this kind of stuff. But I think that is the thing. It's like, if you're trained in the workplace to do your job, why not get trained in marriage and in parenting, right? There's books, there's resources. And here's the cool thing too, and you know this, Wes. We live in a world now, like when I first started podcasting, when I first started this work back in 2000, I started the podcast 2012, but I really started doing this work in 2000, started the podcast 2015, but I started doing the work in 2012. There was not much out there for guys, like hardly anything. And that's why I started it, because I was like, well, if there's not much out there, maybe I can start it. And I started it with the mentality, which is still the same, which is like, let me just learn it publicly. Like, I'll just kind of throw myself out there and learn it and be the idiot and be the moron and tell people how I'm screwing this up and what I'm learning. I just did it for myself. And then that's when the real learning started to happen. I was like, wait a second, there are actually skills that you can learn on how to connect with your wife. There's actually ways you can build intimacy. There's ways you can build connection with your kids. You can create environments of psychological safety where your kids will tell you everything and you'll be your kid's 3 a.m. call, right? Those things can actually happen. And if we leave it to winging it, which most of us do, and we don't understand how to transition from something that we've been trained in into an area where we haven't, that is the biggest miss. And let me just say this as I wrap up. I think career guys, whether you drive a truck for UPS or you fix cars, like my son just got a job at Plaza Tire fixing cars, or whether you're a white collar executive, high level vice president of sales, or you're a CEO. I'm not a CEO, but like you're in the corporate world, you still have a stressful job, right? There's still, but I also think for career guys and for guys in the workplace, when you're on someone else's paycheck, there's a part of you that can compartmentalize it maybe a little bit more than a business owner, because I've lived in both places and we've helped both men in both places. So 9 years ago, we started Dad Edge Alliance. That's for our career guys. That's for guys who have jobs, right? And we teach them about marriage. We teach them about parenting. We teach them about mindset and finances and leadership. And what I found is doing that work for a couple of years is business owners would go into our ecosystem and then they would leave. And I'm like, why are they leaving? And the feedback I kept getting over and over again is like, we're wired, we're a bit cuckoo. We're a bit differently. Like, we have different needs. And then when I became an entrepreneur myself, I really got it. When you run a business, there's a lot of physical, mental, emotional things that go into that business. And a lot of career guys listening to this are like, but that's the same with career guys. I'm like, yeah, it is to some degree. But when you're responsible for paying somebody else's mortgage, and your heart and your soul and your being is invested in that business, like even like mine, right? Then it becomes a much more heavy lift, in my opinion, because it's very hard to switch it off. Especially like if my assistant, who's been working for me for 7 years, desperately needs something, and she's also a good friend of mine. Like, I care about her, and I'm also what I pay her pays her mortgage. Like, that's a much different lift than, my sales rep who's paid by my company who needs something after 5 p.m. And I'm like, sorry, dude, it's got to wait till tomorrow. Right. So we did this because entrepreneurs, especially, these guys are high drivers. Like, they're bulls in china shops. Like, they are warriors slaying dragons, right? That is their mentality. They will do anything to make things happen. The thing that I think really kind of trips up entrepreneurs is they think they have to bring that same type of attitude and tenacity and that type A to family, and it doesn't work, right? And then they get confused of like, I'm out here slaying dragons, I'm doing all of this stuff. Like, why is she not really appreciating this? Why are my kids like distant from me? So what we did is we created what's called the Dad Edge boardroom. The boardroom now creates that structure and those skills of like, yeah, go out and be a warrior, right? Go out and slay dragons. When you come home, this is how you have to be. This is the transition. It's very, very different. And it's very hard, I think, for a business owner to switch that off, right? So that's why we've kind of separated the two. But yeah, there's definitely a transition. But to answer your question, I think the biggest gap is we assume that we should automatically be good at it. And we should assume like, hey, I've never taken jujitsu, but I'm going to go compete. Like, and tell me how that works out. It usually doesn't work out so well.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, we'll make sure to put in the show notes all those resources for what you guys offer in regards to entrepreneurs and career guys. And as you were saying that preparation, that really struck me this question of like, well, then why do we not prepare? And also, how would we prepare? And what comes to mind immediately is this age old saying, there's no guidebook to it, you know? And while I think what I hear in that is actually there's no one path. I think the falsity is believing there is actually no guidebook. And like you're saying, there are resources. There are people out there talking about it. There are places you can go to learn how to do it. But why do we not prepare? I think a few things. One, I was talking to a guest that we were discussing, like, what does rite of passage look like in the West? And he was saying it looks like agrarian society working alongside your dad. You have all these touch points. You learn these life lessons. You hear how he talks to the other guys at work. You naturally get to know, okay, and you're around your parents more, so you see how they talk to each other, you see if they argue, if they don't, all these things. Granted, we've come a long way in a positive manner in regards to healthy relationships, but anyways, you get these touch points, right, to inform you. Also, you have community, you have institution, you know, things like religion were bigger and people look to be out in society more. I think because people are on their screens, they're isolated in their experiences. Even though parents spend more time with their kids, I think parents are also busier. And so it's not quality time touch points as much. And so you're not having these conversations like you did on your patio with your kid because a parent is just stressed out about feeding, cleaning, putting them down, getting schoolwork done, and you're missing all these really quality times. By the time you get the weekend, you're so worn out, you really don't have the capacity to show up. And then I also think because we've lost a lot of the intergenerational connection where you're either not close to your parent, especially your father, or people that have gone before you, you don't see the models, you don't have the conversations, you don't have the touch points to know. And people feel really isolated in aimlessly wondering how to go about it. And I agree that it requires some sort of preparation. Those are the reasons why people don't, in my estimation. And then the question is, well, how would you prepare? And I think it starts with when you're finding a life partner, taking it serious enough to take the time to know who you are and what you want. Because, and this is a bit of what you're going at, you would never think, okay, I only need 6 months to assess a decision that will affect every day of my life for the next 50 years. That amount of time, 50 years all day, you're going to need more than 6 months, right? Obviously. But in our heads, we don't think that, oh, if I get along, we do nice things together. It's kind of generic connections, right? I think it requires you knowing who you are, maybe a partner and how they would be good. And to use your analogy with the jujitsu, a sparring partner, someone that's really going to challenge you but support you. That takes time. Really, what I'm getting at, you have to take dating serious. Then when you
I
get
agree.
into the dating relationship, you got to take the relationship serious. Not as much because you have to have all the answers. And this is where I think a lot of men fall short. they think women want them to have it all together. No, a woman just wants you to have some sort of plan, some sort of vision, some sort of sense of who you are that they can work with and work for. And if you don't do those things, then ultimately it's going to be guys coming to you with the marriage problems, with the parenting problems, because they haven't taken the time to address the barriers that I mentioned of helping them prepare, nor partake in the things that are necessary to prepare to enter into these really serious commitments that are going to affect you the rest of your life.
I agree, man. I think you nailed it. I think a lot of people, get married. Like I remember when my wife and I got married in 2003. We dated for 7 years. And I mean, I kind of came from a really crazy background. My mom was married 3 times, was in and out of crazy toxic relationships, very abusive, drinkers, partiers, like it was just a nightmare. She just kept picking the same guy over and over again. He just had a different name, but different face. And I remember growing up thinking, I mean, this is how twisted my thinking was. I literally just did a podcast on this, that all marriages end in divorce. Like all marriages don't work out. Here's the wild thing. I actually admitted this on the podcast because I really did a lot of reflecting on it. I didn't really want to marry my wife because I was crazy about her and I loved her. And I thought to myself, we're going to get divorced. I don't want to divorce this woman. So why would I marry her? Like, that's how ridiculous I actually thought. I was like, why would I want to marry somebody that I really like and really love because I'm just going to lose them at some point anyway? Wouldn't it make more sense for me to marry just someone I think might be a good idea, but I could also live without? It was really stupid and weird. But I remember, we dated for 7 years and my wife's friends they were all getting married. And the crazy thing is you kind of saw the writing on the wall with a lot of her friends that we were just doing it because it was just the next thing. And I remember my wife in our early 20s of like, like, are we I could tell she was feeling the pressure. And I was like, no, I'm not ready. I am not ready to get married. Like I need to figure some things out. Like, and I know you can. And I told my wife, I know you, if you can't wait, I get it. Like, and maybe I'm not the guy for you, but I'm not rushing into this. I'm just not. And the crazy thing is the majority of my wife's friends are divorced. The people that they married back in their 20s, like, 25 years ago, or they have a really rocky relationship or a disconnected one. And I didn't want that. And not to say that we haven't gone through bad times, because we definitely have. We've had some serious bumps, but I think you're right. I think that there needs to be, a deep knowing of oneself, right? There's got to be, I think, a way of like, hey, this is not going to be sunshine and rainbows. There's going to be speed bumps. Like, how do we, and this, every relationship has harmony, disharmony, and repair. Like, how do we make harmony happen? Like, what is actually the unlocking mechanism of that? How do we make that happen? Because it doesn't just happen. It takes effort. And then when there's disharmony, how quickly and how efficiently and effectively can we get to repair? Because if we stay too long in that season of disharmony, resentment sets in, disconnection sets in. Suddenly we're not having sex anymore. Suddenly we're maybe sleeping in separate bedrooms. And suddenly, how did we even get here? We're waiting for the kids to move out so we can break up. Like, no one wants that either. So it's like, how do we really evolve into this harmony, disharmony, and repair? And I think it takes, like, number one, work on both parts, a deep knowing of each other individually and each other. But it's also like, it's constant work. And and here's the thing is the work can be, in my opinion, and maybe a lot of people who are naysayers would say otherwise. I think the work can be a beautiful journey. I don't think it has to feel like blood, sweat, and tears. I think it'd be like, let's figure this out and let's explore. It's an adventure. Like, what is the keys to your heart? What is the keys to your mind, right? How do we forgive each other? Like, how do we communicate? Let's just continue to explore it versus like, this is a grind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and what you said in telling your story with your wife, these words, "I'm not ready," so powerful. I think we have to start with realizing where we're actually at, not where we wish we were at. But what I would say is you need the humility to accept that you're not ready, but the confidence to know that you eventually reach a day where you should be. And I think many men now believe this
So good.
falsity where, oh, I'm just gonna opt out of marriage and kids. I challenge to a lot of even my buddies that think that is, I was like, I actually, and maybe I'm biased because I have both, but I actually don't think that you don't want that. I just think that you don't know what it would take to have that, or if you have what it takes to have that. And so you just opt out because it's easier to basically beat the rejection to the punch, like you were saying, and saying, well, if I don't take the risk, if I don't step out, if I stay where I'm at, then at least I know it won't end in divorce, rejection, mess. But then you become the shell of a man. And I love your framework where you said the work can be meaningful. I couldn't agree more. It's not seen as a burden. It's actually seen as what I would call a dignified freedom, where you feel like it's on me. Like, actually, how many of us men are craving to be challenged, are desiring deep down to find out what's inside us? And this is Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, right? Like, and you're finding this in everyday life where life is so cushiony and full of comfort now. People are having to make up things. I had to do that. I did a half Ironman in 2021, did an ultra marathon a couple years ago. And in reflecting on that, I said, why did I put myself through that? It wasn't because I thought I was a shit or I enjoyed pushing myself for that long. I had trauma from my childhood, losing my dad when I was 11. I didn't have anyone pushing or encouraging me. And I reached this breaking point where I realized, oh my gosh, I have caved into myself and become such a victim mentality that I actually don't know what's inside me and I got to find out. And I think a lot of us men are craving that. And it needs to be done in community, because the first form of community, by the way, is with your wife and with your kids. I mean, that's the nuclear community. It's like an onion, it works its way out from the center. But I love what you said. You and your wife, it's an adventure of calling each other upwards to be who you were made to be. And the power of having a partner in that is that they have the vision to see who you could be. And they're a mirror that reflects and reminds you of that every day. And the iron sharpens iron. And so, yes, on the outside, you could argue, every day at least for me, every day I'm apologizing. Every day I'm like, where did I go wrong? I'm frustrated that I keep missing the mark. But now, I'm 4 years in, a lot less than you, but I'm already finding, my God, who I am today is just leaps and bounds of who I was, because I committed to the hard work. And in the moment, while it felt annoying, it was meaningful and I couldn't be happier about where I'm at. And then you add kids, that adds another level of refinement. And in short, what I'm getting at is exactly what you're saying, is men need to reframe responsibility as adventure instead of a life sentence.
Totally agree. And can I comment really quickly on the kid thing?
Please. Yeah.
I think a lot of men would embrace this, because I think men always want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, right? They want to have impact on kids, right? I think a lot of guys to some degree want their kids saying, "I learned this from my dad." Right? And I'm not saying that to sound narcissistic. I'm just saying, like, I mean, like, I didn't have a good father figure in my life ever, but I had this amazing grandfather. Like, and I hold that man on like a pedestal. I'm like, I learned that from my grandpa, and I learned that from my grandpa, and I learned that from my grandpa. And every time I share that, even though he's passed away now, and since 1998, there's that part of me. It's like I get to like remember and love him again. Just talking about him like that. And so, I think let's talk about marriage. Just in a silo, right? I think a lot of guys out there is like, well, it's me and my wife, right? When it comes to marriage, I would challenge that, because here's the beautiful thing about generational impact. Where do you think kids are going to learn how to have functional relationships? They're going to learn it from how they watch us, right? The best lessons in life are caught, not taught. One of the most beautiful lessons, my grandfather was a freaking ninja at this, man. My grandfather did very little. He was a man's man. He was a very masculine man. He drove a truck for 7-Up for 40 years. He fixed things. He was a fisherman. And he was the most charismatic man. He walked into a room and people just loved him. And he didn't do it from a narcissistic fake. Like, he genuinely loved people. Like, and he would talk to you, and you felt like you were the only person in that room. And that's just how my grandfather operated. And he did it from this place of heart, not because it made him feel good. And the coolest thing that I got to witness, that I never got to witness in my own house, was I got to watch a man love a woman. My grandfather and my grandmother were married for 53 years. And my grandfather, even in his 70s, I would sit there at the breakfast table with them almost every Sunday, because I would spend the night at their house. They lived a mile from me growing up. And he would grab my grandmother's hand. And I always knew that he did this all the time. And he would rub her hand and he'd look at her and he'd like give her this smile and be like, "What's up, beautiful? You're just so beautiful. I just love you so much." And my grandmother would just melt. Like, in their 70s, she'd walk by, he would slap her on the rear end and pull her on his lap and be like, and just like, and he was like a manly, manly man, right? He wasn't like this what we were talking about earlier. He was like a man's man. And he was just so playful and affectionate. And I'm like, I'm getting chills talking about it because I was like, I got to see that. And that was and my grandfather never said, this is how you love a woman, right? My grandfather was also really, really great at communication. He also, I wouldn't say demanded respect, but he expected respect from my grandmother. And when my grandmother would do something that was maybe disrespectful or emasculating, he'd very respectfully call her out, right? And he'd be like, Jenny, please don't talk to me like that. You know that doesn't work for our relationship. And he would stand toe to toe with her. And she'd be like, you're right. I'm sorry. Right. And so I got to see like this harmony and disharmony and repair, like, but in such a healthy way. And I got to learn that just by watching him. Right. So the cool thing is this: if you want to have generational impact and you want to pass on what a functional relationship looks like, then create a functional relationship in your marriage. So my responsibility, this is the way I view it, and then I'll share how Jessica views it. My responsibility that I feel for my kids is I'm going to show you what it looks like to love a woman well. I'm going to show you what it looks like to honor and respect, to make her feel heard. When she's talking, we listen, to make her feel seen, that when she's doing something, hey, thank you so much for making the kids lunch. Thank you. My wife brought in coffee for me, like while we were doing this. Like, thank you so much for making coffee for me. I really, really appreciate that. It means the world to me that you would even think to do that. Right. And then making her feel safe. Right. I always want to show my kids I'm very affectionate with your mother, not because I want something from her, but because that's who I am. I'm her man and I'm going to do that. And then my wife, her responsibility is I'm going to show you what it looks like to love, honor, appreciate, respect a man, never to emasculate a man, never to, to speak to a man in such a way where it's emasculating or disrespectful or unappreciative. She's like, because this is my wife's thinking, when all these knucklehead girls come knocking on our door and they want to treat you a certain way, no, no, no. Like, this is the standard. This is what you should tolerate, right? Not here. So I think we have if we want to have a generational impact, man, put that marriage of yours on the front burner. Go out and learn those skills because your kids are watching it. And if you want to have your son or daughter-in-law, if you want those chances of maybe a functional relationship and you don't want it to be like, oh my God, I can't believe that daughter-in-law is coming over, or the son-in-law, he's such a pain in the ass, then hold the standard in your own relationship so they can see it and learn those skills and then pass them on.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that, and especially the story about your grandfather. I was also deeply struck by it, in this sense that life never leaves us void. You didn't have that with your dad, but you were graced enough to have it with your grandfather. And I think that example is so powerful for a few reasons. Blue collar guy, two, his generation, right? And then three, being a man, he ticks all the boxes of what a present day person would say. He's probably the least emotional available, probably the least caring, the least effective at expressing emotions. And you essentially said the opposite of all that. So what does that say? If we live in a present day where the average guy is not like that and we have the resources, what's your excuse? I mean, that guy learned it and he probably had, a tenth of the tools and awareness and exposure that we did. And I'm really struck by the caught not taught. I agree that you're always watching. This is the power of a marriage ceremony, by the way, even if, you're not religious, is what's the point of inviting someone to the wedding? Is that you're getting the affirmation of the community. This is why they asked, does anyone object? It's not like a random question. It's because it's seriously saying, do you actually support this couple? Because they are going to affect the way that all of you interact as a person and as a community. And you need to know damn sure that they are better together than apart. And that attendance is the affirmation. And you are witnessing also, it's the community essentially holding you accountable, right? Because you're saying, hey, we care enough to take these vows, to be in front of other people, to invite you all, not just for the pageantry, but for the promise, for the commitment. And that really struck me as what you're saying is your kids are that first community that you have that are looking to hold you accountable to be the man you're supposed to be in your marriage in a way that informs them how to be the same in theirs in the future. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'm going to put on my therapist hat a minute, but I can't help but think that your mission with the Dad Edge is so maybe particularly driven by the wound of not having your own dad to show that model, but yet having your grandfather to really step in and show you what's possible. And that being a motivation and driver to say, I didn't have it directly, but I had it, second degree removed from my grandfather. It was so powerful and life changing. And I also realized the wounding of not having that directly with my father, that your work is really expressed in helping provide that space for many men who find themselves today in the same position, that are looking for guidance, who say, who can I look to? Where's my grandfather that could show me the way? And how many lost boys are out there that are grown men aching and desiring for connection, for growth, but more so just loving, supportive guidance that's often unsaid and more so modeled through being known and knowing others. So I just appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. I've just a couple points of clarity. Number one, I've never heard it said back to me that way of why I started this. It definitely started with the absence, but I think you're right. I got to experience that in sort of in a direct/indirect way through my grandfather, and I did get those nuggets of how beautiful it can be. But it's the constant learning of this. It's like I have a 19-year-old. I've never raised a 19-year-old. So like, the reason I continue to, write books, and I've got another book coming out in September, is like, and I think people who read books and don't write them think that the people that write them have it all figured out. And like, we're like the gurus. And it's actually quite frankly the opposite. Like every book I've written has been more of a solidifying journey of like, what have I learned? And then how can I teach it back? And I think anybody who's written a book will tell you, like, I actually learned more by having to write the book than ever reading one. And that's why I continue to write, is not to preach from a pulpit. It's to continue to learn. And that's why I continue to podcast and interview really smart people like even yourself, right? Which I'd love to have you on the podcast,
That'd be great.
because we get to learn from people like you and I get to learn. And it's just this constant, like, I don't view myself as like, yes, I know a thing or two. And yes, I coach people, right? Because I do know, I look in the rearview mirror of things that I used to do and I'm helping those men now. But I also need people in front of me, like one of our coaches in the boardroom is Jake Herbert. He's an American wrestling legend. He's been in movies and he won the silver medal back in 2012. And, he's been in movies with Channing Tatum and Mark Ruffalo and Steve Carell and, about wrestling. And one thing that Jake, after 30 years of high competitive wrestling, will tell you is that, you need three people in your life. You need the person who's teaching you, who's ahead of you. Then you need the second person is somebody to spar with, right? Someone to go to battle with, someone to teach, to learn these, refine these skills with. And maybe that person should be even a little bit better than you. And then someone that you're teaching, because that's what solidifies all those lessons, is when you get to teach it back to somebody. If we don't have those three people in our life, I think that we're always missing the boat. And what I can tell you is every single year, I hire a coach every year. Because I'm like, what do I need to learn this year? I need to learn something. I need to constantly grow and refine. And then I have people like what you and I were talking about, like Jason, who is my battle buddy, right? We spar with each other, and it's not to say we fight, but we challenge each other. And then there's a ton of people that I'm teaching, but you have to have all three. And I think the most dangerous points in my life was when I didn't have that person in front of me, because I became stagnant and comfortable, right? Which, when I became stagnant and comfortable, I didn't want to reach out to people that I wanted to battle with, like Jason. I wanted to hide, right? Which I'd isolate, which that's a disaster thing. And then you're wondering, like, why am I not showing up for, my kids very well right now? Why am I not doing the things that I'm talking about? Well, it's because those people are not my life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that framework. That's so helpful and clear to know each different dynamic of friendship and relationship you should have with the man. The stats say that the average man has 0 to 1 close friends. So now we know you need at least 4. Probably need a
Right.
backup, right? But yeah, Larry, I just appreciate you being that person that we can learn from behind, and offering so much guidance and wisdom, and just even in your honesty, sharing about your story has been so helpful. So I'm curious, tell us about the book. Tell us about where people can find your work.
Yeah. So my brand new book, and I'm holding it up here for if you're watching this on video. It says not for resale, and that's because this is the proof, but it's Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. I have poured my heart and soul into this book. It took me over a year to write, and that's because it's everything that we've learned in the Dad Edge over the past decade. 1,400 interviews over the past decade. We've helped over 5,000 men come through our group. I've coached. I've had coaches. So everything I've learned about leadership, patience, raising sons, communication, creating environments of psychological safety, making memories, mindset, raising daughters, creating an extraordinary marriage. It's all here. It's divided up into 4 parts. Part 1 is what I call the drift. Drift is where men are experiencing like, my life isn't where I want it to be, but I'm not really, it doesn't feel right to me, but I can't put my finger on it. So I explain what's happening in that drift, right? And the drift kind of feels like, just to preface it, the wash, rinse, repeat of your life, right? And you're just like, this is not really the life that I wanted, but I don't know exactly what good looks like, and I don't know exactly how to go get it. So I explain that in depth in part 1. Part 2 is marriage, right? You want to create more connection, intimacy, communication with your wife, fulfill her needs of being seen, heard, and safe, how to communicate your needs of being respected, appreciated, and also how you need physical affection, and how you can actually, go from harmony, disharmony to repair, and everything in between, more sex and intimacy. That's part 2. Part 3 is all about raising your kids, right? And here's what I'll tell you just in one sentence. Without connection, you have no influence. Without connection, you have no influence. And what a lot of parents, like I did this too, we like to be a parent first, be a disciplinarian, an authoritative figure, without connecting with them. And then we have no idea how to connect with them. And then we don't understand, why are my kids not doing what I want them to do? Why are they not opening up to me? Why are they not telling me things? Like, why are they leaving me in the dark? Like, why are they hanging out with this kid? And why are they in their room closing their doors and they never want to be around us? I don't understand. It's all here. And then the 4th part in this is leadership. And there's 10 elements of leadership as it relates to being a man, husband, and father. And it actually starts with us leading ourselves. But I break that down in the book. But literally, decade of work is in that book for people, and it drops on September 16th this year, and it'll be on Amazon or wherever books are sold.
Well, it's so exciting. And, throughout this conversation, we've been talking about the desperate need for more models and guidance and wisdom. And this certainly seems like a one-stop shop to get started for any man. So we'll make sure to promote that, put it in the show notes. I'm going to grab a coffee. And man, Larry, I just appreciate you giving yourself and your story and your life to this work. It's so imperative. You could easily just make the money and run, but just appreciate that you've developed a healthy family, a healthy marriage, a healthy business that shows a man what it can look like to be mature.
Thank you. And thank you so much for allowing me to come on the podcast and chat. It was amazing. You're a great interviewer, by the way.
Thank you, man. Yeah, well, it's worth preparing for people such as yourself. So guys, thanks for listening and tagging along. And until next time.